So, welcome to our second project in this course. And without further ado, let me actually show it to you. And so here it is. This project is called Trello, and it is a fictional all-in-one booking app. Okay, so the idea is that a user can book a hotel, a flight, a car, and a tour all on one platform. Now, of course, we're not going to build this app itself, so no functionality, but we're going to code this user interface here. So all of this app that you see here. So here in navigation, you can see that we're right now browsing the hotel section. And so here on this side, you have an hotel overview. So some pictures, then the name, some stars here, and then an overview where you have a list with a couple of features. And then here on the right side, you have some reviews. Okay, then down here we have a section where we can book, and then you have this nice hover effect here on this button. Okay, and here you probably already saw here on the navigation, we also have this nice hover effect here going on. So this one here, and then here at the top we have like this header bar where you have the logo, then the search bar, and then basically here are bookmarks, some chat, and the name of the user. So that is our project. So the main focus, of course, is on Flexbox here. But you're also going to learn a couple of new stuff, like doing these cool animations here and how to use these icons, because these are actually SVG icons, and that's something really cool. And so I'm going to show you how to use these. And so in general, you're going to learn Flexbox, but also a couple of other different techniques that I'm going to show you. And once again, I tried to make this a really beautiful, really modern looking app so that you not only learn how to code and not only learn Flexbox, but so that you also get some inspiration for building a beautiful web app, and also that you have some nice thing to show after this course. And so I hope that you really like the look of this app, of this interface. I know that I really like it. Okay, I put a lot of work in this so that you can be proud of your work by the end of the project. So all we need in order to get started with this project is our starter files that you can download from the course if you didn't already, and then just open up that starter files in your code editor. So I already have the starter files here on my desktop. Okay, so this folder, and I also have it opened up already in VS Code. HTML struct in our previous project, where all we have is title here, so Trello app, and then the font, which this time is open, and the style, which is already included in here. Now what we also have is a Sass folder, because once again we're okay, and then an empty file where all we have is these color definitions. So what I also have here is, of course, use CSS, still empty because when we compile or send, so that one is still empty. I also have this package JSON file for that. And so let's actually now start by changing this one here and to adapt it to our needs for this project, because I don't want to write all of these scripts here again, and so we can use it here in this project as well, because it's actually really the same thing. Okay, so again, we have a main.scss file, which is going to compile to style.css. We want our dev server here, and we want the CSS header dev server. And so we have this start script here, right? Remember that one? Start element setup. And then down here, we also have the build process, which in fact is also this is not, because we don't have the icon fonts here, okay? So not really anything to concatenate. So let's take this one out, and then the input to this one here is comp, right? So this build process here is a bit smaller than the project. So we're going to compile the Sass code here, then prefix it here, and compress, and yeah, so our build process is these three. So the concat has to go, of course. So compile, prefix, and then compress. Okay, but we're going to talk about this later, because we're only going to use this build process in the end of this project. Okay. Okay, different. So let's just say it's the Trello app. Okay, doesn't really matter. Okay. So that's the console here, and here I'm just going to write Trello. Just see things. And so the terminal. So right here, I have to navigate to the desktop. Trello. Now to make sure it has the CSS, I am index and package.json. Navigate like I did, we can run npm start with our previous project. And something's not working, and of course it's not working, so you have to first install our packages. Okay? And now remember one of the first lectures where we talked about npm. So back then I told you we copy the package.json file, but we don't copy the node Sass folder, which is all of these packages here, right? So we never copy that folder, share it. We just install all the packages over again. So we say npm install. And so now it gets all of these packages and installs them in a new node modules folder. Okay, clear? Now we can write again, npm run start. And okay, let's just do some Sass here, or some Sass. We can say margin 0, padding 0. Background color, intensity, okay. So our Sass is working fine. Okay, and so everything is working, and so we're now to actually start building the project lecture. In this lecture, we will build the overall layout of our app, and so we will first discuss how to do that, and then use Flexbox for the first time in real life to create a part of that layout. So looking at the final design of our app, what can we say about the overall layout of this interface? Well, first of all, there is this huge container here, so all of this which actually holds the entire app, okay? And that container is also nicely centered here in the viewport. So that's the first element of the layout. Then in this container, we first have this header part here, let's say, where we have the logo, the search bar, and then these user navigation items. Okay, so this here is the header. Then below that, we basically have two big parts. The first one I call the sidebar, which is this. So it has this navigation, and it has this small legal text here, okay? Then on the right side, we have this hotel overview, which is how I like to call this. So a huge block which then contains all of this information about this hotel that we're currently watching. So these are the three parts inside of the container. First the header here on top, then on the left side the sidebar, and then here on the right side the hotel view. Okay? So let's mark that up in HTML before we start writing the CSS for that. So let's start with the overall container. I'm using a div element for that. And once again using emmet here. So container. So that's our container where all the content will be. Then in there we have, as I mentioned, the header. And for that one we're going to use the header element in HTML5, okay? So header with the class of header. Okay? So that's the top part. Let's actually write header in here. So the header part. And then remember that we have the sidebar and the hotel view. Now, in order to position these two elements, we actually need a container for them, okay? And I'm going to call that one content. So I'm using a div again, and then content. So basically the content is like the entire part which is below the header. So it's the sidebar, for which I'm using the nav HTML5 element, because it mainly holds our navigation, okay? And so I think nav is the best element to show that, to convey that meaning to the element, okay? So nav and then sidebar. So I'm writing navigation here just so we know what box is what. And then we have the hotel view. And this time I'm using the main HTML5 element because I think this is a perfect element, because as the name says, the main element is where the main part of a website or a web app goes. And in this case, that's clearly this hotel view. Okay, and so main is perfect here. So hotel view. And that is already our overall layout. Okay, so that's exactly what we have here. Header, then the content, which is all of this together, and then on the left side, the navigation, or the sidebar, actually how I called it, and then here on the right side, the hotel view. Okay, so let's now move over to our layout file here and start writing our code. So we have our container, we have our header, the content, sidebar, and finally hotel view. And let's start with our container. So the first thing I want to define is the width of this container. And I'm once again going to use max width here, so that the container can decrease if there's not enough space to display our 120 rem, which is the width that we want for this container. Okay. So 1200 pixels basically, if we have enough space, but if it's not enough space, so if the viewport is less than 1200 pixels, then we simply occupy 100% of that available view width. Okay, and that's what max width does. All right, then I also want to center it in the viewport. And I'm using our old trick here with margin. Okay, so top and bottom, let's actually put 8 rem here, so 80 pixels, and then the left and right side set to auto, as we did in the previous project as well. Okay, and so that centers the container inside of its parent element, which is the body in this case. Now we also want a background color in this container, and the one I'm going to use is color gray light 2. Okay, so this one, let me show it to you. So base, I'm actually going to leave it open here. So this is the gray color that I defined for the background. Okay, and then we want a nice box shadow, and a really dark one actually. So 0 in the X direction, of course, then 2 rem, and now 6 rem, so really huge blur here, and then a 0.3 opacity. Okay, so let's actually take a look at that. Well, actually before we should maybe define a height here as well. So a max, or actually a min height. Okay, and so this is just for testing purposes once again. Okay, and so now we can take a look at the result, and here we go. Okay, let's close this one here. And so that looks pretty good already. So we have our nice shadow here, and we can see our 3 layout elements here as well. So header, navigation, and hotel view. So let's go back. And actually we can reuse this shadow maybe in the future. And so I want to show you that we cannot only use colors, we can use other stuff as well as variables. Okay, so let's add a new one here, simply called shadow dark. And then we can do it like this. So variables, of course, not only work for colors here, but we can store other things in there as well. So let me now just copy this, and then in here I can simply say var again, and then the name of the variable. So let's check that out, and you see it still works the same. Okay, and so now if we need it, we can reuse it later in the project. Okay, so now I'm for the header, and here once again I'm going to define a height, and this one will be 7 rem, so 70 pixels in height. I want it to have a background color, a white one, and I'm simply just going to write out FFF because I know that that means white, and then it should also have a border bottom. Okay, and actually the color that I want here is this light gray, and the one that I want here is the gray number 1. So these are just very subtle variations of the same light gray. So let me show that to you. Okay, and so here you see it. Okay, so next up, let's think about the navigation and the hotel. So for the sidebar, we want a background color of this dark gray here. So the darkest color of all. So var and gray dark 1. And on the hotel view, we simply want a white background. So let's grab this one as well. And let's now take a look again. And all right, now of course, we want these two to be side by side, right? So the navigation on the left side, in the hotel view on the right side. And what is the perfect tool for doing that? And I'm sure you guessed it, we're going to use Flexbox now. So in order to start Flexbox, all we need to do is to set the display property of the Flex container to Flex, right? So display Flex, and that's it. So this one here, of course, will be our Flex container, right? Because it's the one that holds the two elements we want side by side. So content will be our Flex container, and sidebar and hotel view will be our two Flex items. Okay, so just to see if this actually worked, let's take a look. And yeah, so actually they are side by side now, not occupying a lot of space, of course, but they are already side by side, and so that's a good starting point. Now let's set some properties on the individual items in order to make them look more like this here, okay? So the navigation should have a width, and I'm sure that you know how to do that, right? So the property that we use with Flexbox to define is the Flex basis property. Now we should always use it in the shorthand Flex property, okay? That's what we're going to do now. So Flex, then the first one is Flex grow, and we don't want the element to grow beside the width that we're going to define. We also don't want it to shrink, okay? Because remember, the second value here stands for Flex shrink, so it's 0 as well. And then we want the Flex basis, which is 18%. And that's it. So 18% is the number that I came up with, which is the perfect width for the sidebar. But you can experiment with other numbers here until it fits the perfect width for you. And so that's it. So once again, with Flex, we see that we don't want the element to grow if there's some space. We also don't want it to shrink if there's enough space, but we always want it to keep at 18%. And since it's a percent value here, it's actually okay to say that we don't want it to shrink, because it will automatically shrink because it's a percentage, right? So it's not like a pixel value. In that case, it would be better to allow it to shrink, but right now it's good like this, okay? So let's check it out. And all right, you see here that it has now this 18%. In the hotel view, well, it's still this very small. Let's actually give it a background color as well, a different one. So just to see it a bit better. So I'm sure you guessed it, it's orange red again. So you see that this element is still very small, which of course we don't want. We want it to occupy the entire remaining space, right? So using Flexbox terms, we want it to grow as much as it can. And what it means in code is to simply say Flex 1. Okay, and that's it. So again, by using Flex 1, what we say is that the element should grow as much as it can. So over all the available space it has. And that's what happened here. So it now grew all the way until the right side and is occupying the remaining 82%, right? So 100 minus 18 is 82. And so that is the power of Flexbox. There's no floats, there is no clear fixes, there's no weird hacks like all that. Just very simple, just 3 lines of code actually. We just wrote this flex here, and the display to flex. So that was all we needed to create this small layout. Okay, and that's actually all I had to show you in this lecture. So the overall layout is now coded up, and we're ready to start building here the header. So that's what we're going to do right in the next lecture. Welcome back. In this lecture and the next one, we're going to build the header part of the app. And that will include using SVG images as icons instead of an icon font. So you're going to learn what SVGs actually are, how to find, generate, and use SVG sprites in HTML, how to change the color of an SVG image in CSS, and finally, you will learn some more advanced Flexbox alignment techniques, which we're going to need to lay out all the components in the header. So in our header, we basically have 3 main components. We have the logo here, okay? Then we have this search bar with this input field here and this icon. And then on the right side, we have something that I call the user navigation. So we have like bookmarks, a chat functionality, and the name of the user. Okay, so these three are the main components: logo, search bar, and user navigation. So let's mark that up in our HTML right now. So header. And we start with the image, which I simply call logo. And the source for this one is in the img folder and simply called logo. And as a description, I just use Trello logo. So that's the first part. Next, we have a search bar, and for that, I'm using a form element, okay? And the action is just the hash symbol, so nothing happens, okay? Now in here, we want an input, which is called search input. And as you see, once again, I'm using the BEM notation here, okay? So search is my block, and then the element is the input separated with these two underscores, okay? Now we also have the placeholder here, which says search hotels, okay? And then the button. And you guys, this one is called search button. Now remember that in here, button, we actually had this little icon, this magnifying glass. So this icon here, right? So in the last Natures project that we built, and maybe in your projects that you've built for yourself, we've been using icon fonts, right? But this time we're going to do it differently, and we're going to use SVGs as icons, okay? Now, why are we actually moving away from icon fonts to SVGs? Well, there are several problems with icon fonts, like the fact that it's really just a hack to display icons, which are like images using a font. Also, icon fonts fail more often than you would think, and in that case, the browser just displays a black square or something like that on the screen. That's really terrible. And there are actually other issues, like screen readers for blind people trying to read out the icon fonts, and of course failing to do so. Alright? And because of that, right now it's actually considered a best practice to move away from icon fonts and to move to a better alternative. And that better alternative is of course SVG. Now what is SVG actually? Well, SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphics, and it's just basically a way of writing vector graphics with code. But don't worry, we're not going to write any SVG code here for icons, okay? Instead, we're going to use a great app called iComoon. And so let's open that one, iComoon.io. And so it's just really a simple web app, okay? So let's move here to where it says iComoon app. So here in the iComoon app, you can upload an icon font if you want, for example here. So if you have an icon font on your computer and want to convert it to SVGs, then you can do it in here, okay? But what's even better is that we can just select some icons from their free library, okay? So let's do that. So if you come down here, you have add icons from the library. Then you have all of these free libraries with these free icons, okay? So you can take a look at these, and the ones that I'm choosing are called in typo, okay? So in typo plus, because I really like these and I think they look great on our app. So we just hit add, and then from here, all we have to do is to select the icons that we actually want, okay? And if we take a look at this finished app, we see that we actually need 10 icons. So these 4 icons here, then a star, then this bookmark, this chat, this location pin, this list item icon here, and then finally, of course, the magnifying glass, the one we're going to use next. Okay, so these 10 icons is the one that we need to select. So here is one, here is the next one, then here is the plane, here is the chat, down here we have the house, and also the key down here. Let's see, add the location, then here the magnifying glass, the map, and finally the star down here. Okay, so we have our 10 icons selected. You can see it here, we have 10, okay? Now if you wanted other icons or more icons, you could of course select as many as you wished, okay? So all we have to do now is to come here, generate SVG and more, And then we see our 10 icons that we selected. Then we hit here the settings. Okay, so we see that there will be a class prefix called icon. And we don't want any PNGs. We just want SVGs. Okay, there's SVG here now, and now we can hit download and open it up. So when you open this, it gives you all this stuff here, which you really don't use. Okay, so all we need are these SVG files here, and even more importantly, this file here. So symbol devs, and this is a so-called sprite file. So what is a sprite file? Well, it's simply an SVG file which contains all of these 10 SVG images in it. Okay, and so that's the one that we're actually going to use, because this way we only have to use one global file, which is this one here, and from there we can select each of the icons. And so this way we only have one HTTP request for one file, instead of having to include all of these 10 different files. So icon sprites like this one here is the way to go, and that's how all professionals do it. Okay, we have this HTML file here, which is just so that we can see the names of the icons. And actually this is the right one. The one that we need is just demo. So these are names of the icons that we can then use in HTML. So first let's get our icon here. So this entire folder, and then this one here, and I'm going to copy it to the project folder. So Trello, IMG, and then I'm pasting it in here. All right, here we go. Now I'm going to call this one sprite, and actually I already have one sprite because I included it here because I already had it. Okay, so I'm going to delete it and call this one sprite. So you should also delete the sprite file that you already had, and then change this one here to sprite. And so that's the one that we're going to use. I'm also leaving this folder here with these initial files because we're going to need maybe one of them later. Okay, so and with this we already use this sprite SVG file. So let's go back to our code editor here and include it. Now, how do we actually do that in HTML? Well, the SVG element, which I'm going to call search icon. And then in here we have to use something called use. Okay, so use, and then an attribute called xlink href. So that sounds a bit strange, but that's just how we can include the SVG file and then reference each separate icon in there. Okay, so img sprite.svg, and that's the name of the sprite file. Now from here we have to select the icon that we want. So let's see how it's called. And it's called icon magnifying glass. Let's copy that. And now we use hash and then the name of the icon. And that's actually it. So closing it, and here we go. So this is really the best way to include SVGs in HTML using a SVG sprite like we did. And that's because this way we can actually change the color of each of the icons using CSS. And I'm going to show you how in a little bit. Okay. Now another thing that I need to tell you is that using SVGs like this with the xlink href attribute is only going to work on a web server. So only on a web server you will be able to see this sprite SVG file. But since we're doing that actually, okay, we are using a web server, which is this local one here. So this localhost server, and that's why it actually works. And so here is our SVG icon, right? So everything works perfectly, and we're now ready to start using SVGs in our HTML. And that's a great step. Now this is of course not formatted here at all, but we're going to take care of that later. And another advantage actually of SVG is that it makes it really easy to format these icons. With icon font it was always really hard to put them exactly the way we wanted, but with SVGs that problem is gone, and it's actually super easy. Okay, and now finally the user navigation. So we're using the nav HTML5 element for the navigation. And then in here, I'm going to put 3 boxes. So let me show that to you. So 1 box for each of these. This box, and this box. Okay, so let's do that. So you have the name of the block, nav icon, and then in here our SVG. Now actually this is not the name that I wanted here. Let me change that. So icon box. So now it's okay. So this is a box where the icon will sit. And this one is the user nav icon. And now let's use the use again. So xlink href and img sprite. And this time let's check it out. We will want to use the, here it is. Let's close the icon moon. So we want the one called icon bookmark and the next called icon chat. So icon bookmark and next time the icon chat. Let's actually click already. Okay, so icon chat. Give it some space here. All right. And actually we also want like this notification indicator here, right? So this small notification circle here, okay? So that's just a span element, which I'm calling user nav notification. And here let's put a, and then in the other one, let's put 13. Okay, and now the next box, user nav, and this one I'm calling simply the user. So if you have an image here, as you remember, and this one is called, I think it's the one called user, and that's actually a picture of myself. So user photo, and then just a span for the name. So user nav, username, and then my name in here. And that is our HTML markup for the header. So let's check it out. And that's of course terrible at this point. So let's try to do some quick formatting here, especially of the images and icons, which are now like really huge. Okay, so we should fix that. So let's now open our components file here, because I'm going to write all the code for all these smaller components right here into this file. This stuff that we're going to put here, these are not really components in the meaning that I gave them in the last project. So they're not necessarily really reusable across projects, but I'm still calling them components here because that's the easiest way to do it here right now. Okay, so this one is called logo. And what I want here is a height of 3.25 rem. Okay, so remember once again that this project is not really about CSS architecture and all that stuff that I showed you in the last project, because these are really important. But in this project, I just want to focus on Flexbox and on building this app. All right, so that is the logo. And let me actually put a comment here on each of these so-called components. So just a line of these slashes here to separate them. And I simply say logo. Okay, and now I do the same thing for the search box. And down here the same thing for the user nav. So search, and in here we have the input. And of course it's 2 underscores. And the button, of course. Let's see if we have something else here. So we have input, button. Oh, and here is icon as well. So, all right, icon. Now for the user navigation, let's also put these selectors here already. So user nav, and here we have the icon box. And let's see what else we have. So icon box, then we have icon here, notification, user, user photo, and username. So there's a lot of to select here. So icon box, icon. We have the notification. The user photo, and finally the user name. So that's a lot to format here. But what I want to start with for now is these huge parts, okay? So we already gave the icon here a smaller size, but we want to do the same with this magnifying glass and with these two icons, and of course with this user image here, okay? So let's do that right now. So let's start with the search icon here. Now, how do we actually format an SVG icon? Well, it's really easy compared to icon fonts. All we have to do is to set its height and its width in order to size it the way we want. So let's set to RAM for both the height and the width. Check it out. And here we go. And now it's really small. And now here for the user nav icons as well. And these here should be slightly big. So I'm putting 2.25 rem for both the height and the width. 2.25 rem. And now finally the user photo. Let's give it a height of 3.75 rem. Okay? And since we're at it, I'll also make it a round, so border radius of 50%. And then let's see how it looks like right now. That looks better, but still far from perfect. So in the next lecture, we're going to take care of actually aligning all of these items properly using, of course, Flexbox, and then to style everything so that it looks great, just like this here. Okay? So that's what we're going to take care in the next lecture. See you then. This is part 2 of building the app's header section. So to start this lecture, let's actually put these 3 elements that we have here in the header side by side. And how do we do that? Well, you guessed it, we're going to use Flexbox. So what would be the Flex container here in this case? Well, it should simply be the parent element of the elements that side by side. And that's these 3 here. So the logo, the search bar, and the user information, right? And so the parent of these is the header element. So here we go. Yeah, so in the header. So what we have to do is to set display to flex, and that will put them side by side. All right, now let's give them actually some background color so that we can see what's going on here. So the search, I'm going to use my orange red favorite here again, and then on this one here we can use like green, yellow. All right, check it out. So here we go. Now, how do we want these to be aligned? We want this green one here, so the user navigation, all the way to the side, right? And then this one here in the middle. And what is the Flexbox property that allows us that? I hope that you printed your cheat sheet so that you can take a look at it and find out which property we have to use. Okay? And in case you don't know, we need to use justify content. And of course, that one is again on the Flex container, not on the Flex items. Okay? So justify content will align the elements along the main axis. And that's the one we're talking about here, right? So what are the possible values here? For example, we could use center just to show it to you. And that's what that would do. So it would simply center all of these elements side by side here in the center of the Flex container. But that's also not what we want, because what we want is space between. Okay, and so it will basically divide the empty space between these 3 elements. And that's what that looks like, and it's perfect. That's exactly what we want. We could also do like space around. Let me show that as well. It would result in this one, but that puts way too much space here on the left side, this one, and here on the right side. So we don't want that. We only want a little space, and so we're going to do that later with margins. But for now, in here, let's do space between. And I think that this one is actually the most useful one of all. All right. So that is alignment along the main axis, so from left to right. But we also want to align these items along the cross axis, right? So basically here from top to bottom. So that, for example, we can have this image here nicely centered vertically in the header. So if we didn't have Flexbox, we could now use like margin top and would then have to experiment which is the perfect margin. But Flexbox makes our lives so much easier, and all we have to do is use the align items property, right? So remember that one? Align items and simply set it to center. And that's what it will produce. So this one is now nicely centered vertically, so along the cross axis, and so is this one and this one. This one is of course overlapping it because there's too much content in it, but still it is now centered. So you saw that before it was set to stretch, and that's why this element here was occupying the entire space, so everything here was orange, right? But now we set it to center, and so vertically centered now. So that is align items. So all we have to really do now is to just format these elements here, okay? So let's start with our logo and simply give it some margin to the left side of 3 m, okay? And so now that's perfect, so really nicely positioned here. So starting here with the search element, let's first give it some width, okay? And since it's a flex item, let's do that using the flex property. So flex, we want it to grow to fill all its available space, okay? We also don't want it to shrink, and we want it to occupy 40% of the header, okay? Now as for the input element, this is how we want it to look like, okay? So it's this gray rounded element here with this gray icon here at it, okay? So let's now do that. And so we start with the font family, which on an input element doesn't inherit the font family of the global document. And so we have to automatically set it to inherit here. And the same thing for the font size. So let's set it to inherit here as well. And then we want the background color. And again, we're going to use our variables here. And the one that we want right now is this gray color here, okay? So light gray 2. We want it to have no border. We also want the text color to be inherited. Okay, so we set all of these here in the same place. Well, what else can we do? We can set some padding. So 0.7 rem on the top and bottom, and 2 rem on the left and on the right side. So 20 pixels. Now we also can set border radius to a really high number. Doesn't matter. You can even set it in pixels. It doesn't really matter. Just a high number so that it has these rounded edges. Okay, let's take a look actually. And that's what it looks like. Well, still not perfect, but we're kind of getting there. We have to actually give it a width here. Okay, and we're not doing 100% because we want this to happen when we click it. You saw that? So it expanded when it received the focus, and when we click outside, it goes back to the original size. So let's set it to like 90%. Okay, and then we can also change what we want to happen when we focus the element. So focus, we don't want that outline, okay? But instead what we want to happen is that the width should be set to 100%. So that's the effect that we saw earlier. So when the input element becomes focused, it increases from 90% to 100% of its available width, which is this 40% here of the parent element. We also want it to become a little bit darker, which is basically the same thing as this, but the light number 3. So that's a bit darker. And for the animation here, transition all in 0.2 seconds. So let's take a look at that now. And that's much better. So when we click it, it increases to 100%. Great. Well, it's still not perfect, but for now, let's continue with styling this button here now, okay? So here we are, done. So first, we don't want any border on it. And then we wanted to have the same background as the input, because we basically want it to be like on top of the input, right? And actually, in order for that to happen, we should give the input here some negative margin on the right side. So margin right, and then like minus 3.5 rem. And so this way the button will move on top of the input. Okay, now let's also just remove the focus here from this one. So outline none. But what happens instead is that basically when we click the button, we just want it to move a bit down. So transform, translate y, and then let's just say 2 pixels. All right, let's take a look now. And that's much better. So now it's actually on top of the search bar. And when we click this, we see this nice animation gone. Now what's left to do here is to actually center this icon here vertically as well as horizontally, right? Because when the input field is not active, we want it to be at the center of this element here, right? So of the parent element. So how do we do that? Well, the best solution is once again to use Flexbox. And so you see each time we want to center something or to align something, we can always use Flexbox. So Flexbox is perfect for all of these small situations where we need to align or center some elements. So what should actually be the flex container of these elements? Well, of course, it's the search element, right? And so now for the first time, we're doing something that we didn't do before, which is that a flex item is becoming a flex container. And that is perfectly possible. So we now have nested Flexbox. Okay. So again, let's take a look. And it's already centered, you see, because align items is set to stretch. So align items, let's move it from stretch to center, and then justify content. So to center. So again, align items to center centers the elements along the cross axis, and justify content center centers the elements along the main axis. So check that out. And yep, that is exactly what we wanted, right? So I hit this, and now it grows to the sides. So that's perfect. Now this margin here is not perfect here actually, but that's because of the negative margin that I gave it here on the other side, which is actually a bit too much. So it was here. And actually another thing that we have to do is to set the background color of the button to the same color of this focused here when the input is focused, right? So right now, if you look closely, you will see that if the input is selected, the background color here, this icon, is slightly lighter, okay? So let's fix that. And we have to actually do it outside here. So input, focus, and then select the adjacent search button, right? So we did that a lot of time in the other project. So just to remember, here we have the input and here we have the button, and they are siblings, okay? And so therefore we can use the adjacent selector to select the sibling of the selected input, okay? So here in the components, and now what we want to happen is that the button becomes the same background color as the input, okay? And so now it should be perfect. All right, now one last thing is the color of this magnifying glass. Remember that I told you that with the way that we included the SVG sprite in the HTML, we could change the SVG color right in CSS, right? So let me now show you how we can do that. And it's actually very easy. All we have to do is to use the fill property. So fill, and that's it. And now we can specify our color. And the one that I want is this dark gray here, the number 3. And that's actually it. Let's just remove here this background color. And then this component will be completely ready. Okay, let's just compare it to this one. Well, this is actually a bit different because the text is bigger here and lighter. And so we should change that as well. So basically the placeholder here has a lighter text. Then when we start typing, it becomes the dark text that we have in in our example, right? So what we have to do here is to change the placeholder text. So let's do that. So input, and then remember what we want is the WebKit input placeholder pseudo element. So WebKit input placeholder, meaning that this only works in WebKit right now, which are the Chrome and Safari browsers. So we want a font weight of 100 only and a color of a light gray 4. Okay, and now just remember that we put the font size here to inherit. And so it inherits the global font size, which is 10 pixels, remember, so 1 rem. But that's quite small actually. And so let's set a default font size here on the header. Okay, so let's go to the header and set a font size here. And then it inherits the font size from this parent component. So let's set it to 14 pixels here, so 1.4 rem, and then check it out again. And yeah, that's much better. Now that looks a lot like our original, right? So this one here. So that was some great progress. You used a lot more Flexbox in this lecture to align the other elements here in this component and also overall in this header here, right? So Flexbox is perfect for these small kind of situations where you have to do some simple alignments. So instead of thing with margins and translates and floats and text align center and all of that stuff, we just use Flexbox and it's perfect for that. Now next up, we need to fix this user navigation here, of course, but I'm leaving that to the next lecture so that you can take a break right now and then come back to the next lecture once you're ready to go. All right, let's now finish the header in this third part. So we formatted the logo, we formatted the search bar. Now it's time to format the user navigation. And the first thing we have to do is to put these 3 elements. So this one, and this one here, all side by side. And so what's better than using Flexbox for that, right? So down here we have the user navigation. And so we're going to set display to flex to turn this into a flex container. And once again, we have the situation that we had with the search bar before, where a flex item is also at the same time a flex container. And that is completely normal. It's no problem to do that. And it's actually pretty common, as you will see throughout the rest of the project. We're going to do that all the time. So display flex, and this is what it looks like. Now the next step is to vertically center the elements here, right? So along the cross axis. And so we use align items, set to center, and so that's what we get, and that's much better. So what can we do next? Well, let's take a look at this here. And so the next thing that I want to do is to apply the spacing here. Oh, what's going on here? Let's do it. Ah, right. So the next thing that I want to do is to give it this spacing here between the boxes, and then also this gray background color on hover, right? So let's quickly implement that. So where we want this space to happen is basically on the user nav icon box and this one and the user. Okay, so these 2 classes. Now, I could go ahead and group them. So make a selector for icon box and user at the same time. Simply going to do it like this. So the user nav and then all of the direct children. And that will have the exact same effect, right? Because we only select the direct children, which is what that select here does. So all we do is to select this element, and this one. And that's exactly what I was saying before, right? So first some padding, and we want 0 on the top and 2 on the left and right. So 2 rem. And we want to have a cursor in the form of a pointer. So I don't know if you saw that in the demo. And now let's take care of that background. So we select all of them again, but this time on hover. And what we want to happen is the background color set to our gray light 2 color. So let's copy that from here because it's a lot of code to type out. So this one here. Now this is not going to work as expected but I'm going to show it to you why. So this is the gray hover for this icon box, and then for the user. So the height of this entire navigation bar here is given by the height of this element here, right? But that's not really what we want. We want this navbar to fill this entire space all the way from the beginning of the header to the end. So how can we actually achieve that? And there's one great Flexbox property for that, which I showed you before, and it's called align self, okay? So this is like align items, but for one individual item, right? So align self, I want this one set to stretch. Okay, so remember that in the header, we set the align items to center. And that's why the three elements, the logo, the search bar, and the user nav, are vertically centered. But in fact, we don't want the navbar to be vertically centered. And override the align items here with align self, setting it to stretch, which can produce this result. Okay, and so that's much better. Now all we have to do to fix the fact that this hovering here is not going all the way from the top to the bottom is to then set the height of all of these elements to 100%. So I'll take it out now. And so here we go. Now it's hovering the entire area. Okay. And so that is the power of align self. Now what's happening here, of course, is that this icon and this text is all the way at the top of its parent element. That's completely normal, but we should fix that. It should obviously be centered here vertically, right? And I'm sure that by now you can guess how to do that. So Flexbox to the rescue. So let's go to the icon box, display, flex, and then align items set to center. So once more, remember that align items aligns the flex items along the cross axis, and so usually vertically. And that's exactly what we want. We want to center it vertically, so we use align items. And so now you see that we are already at the third level of flex containers, right? So that actually works. So the header is a flex container, then the navbar here, all of this element flex container, and now the icon box itself is a flex container as well. So we're already at the third level of flex containers. And once more, that's no problem. That is absolutely okay. That is how Flexbox works, really. And actually, since we're doing this, we should actually do the same thing here with the user, right? So all of this should also be vertically centered. And so instead of putting it here in the icons where we put it, we can actually put it here so that we do it to all of the direct children. So the two icon boxes as well as the user. Okay, and so that is much better. So all of these three are now effectively flex containers as well. Right, so let's now take care of these icons here. So changing the color and then formatting the notification here as well. So as for the icon, we already have its height and its width. Now let's also take care of the color of the icon. So once again, let's use the fill property, setting it to a dark gray. So the same one as well. Where is it? Actually, it's not here anywhere. So let's just copy this here and then change it. So color gray dark 2. Okay, so that's this one, so 777. So that's the color. And now let's format the notification here. So it should have a font size of 0.8 rem, so really small, then a height of 1.75 and a width as well of 0.75 rem, so 0.75, and here the same, and then a border radius set to 50%, and actually here it's 1.75, so such as I had it in the beginning. So 1.75 rem. Then the background color should be our primary pink color. So that's our primary color. And then the text there should be white. And so I'm just going to use FFF here again. And so let's take a look at that. And that looks pretty good already. Now we have to actually position this element here on top of the icon, right? And so the best way of that is this time not using Flexbox. So Flexbox doesn't really give us a way to perfectly position an element exactly where we want it, but instead we're just going to use absolute positioning here, okay? So let's do that. So position absolute, and then remember the parent element should be set to position relative. So position relative here, and now let's say we want it on the top like 0, and from the right like 1 rem, just to experiment with this. And somehow it's gone. I see it's up here now, and I'm not really sure why that is. So I guess maybe it's best to remove this position relative from here and put it here. So maybe it doesn't work that well on an SVG, which the icon is in fact. And so let's just put it on the icon box. And so yeah, that works much better. Now we just have to move it down a little bit. So top like 1.5 rem. All right, here we go. Now just maybe a bit more to the left side. So here, so 1.1 rem, but that should be perfect already. Now let's just get rid of this background color here. It looks kind of silly by now. And yeah, so that's great. Now all we have to do is to like center this text in here, both horizontally and vertically. And so let me tell you another secret, let's say, which is that we can actually use Flexbox for that as well. So Flexbox doesn't only work when we have child elements, but it works with text as well. So display flex, and now we simply have to say justify content center, which centers the content horizontally, and align items also to center, which is gonna center it vertically. So let's take a look at that. And in fact, you see that it works. So in this case, you actually have now 4 levels of Flexbox, one inside of another. Now what you see here maybe is that this is not really a circle here. And I think that's because this text here is larger than this one. You see this one is like a perfect circle, but this one is not. So I think we shouldn't use a border radius 50% here, but instead just like a very high number. So just as we did before here on this part. And actually it looks the exact same way, but never mind. This is really not a problem. All right. Now all we have to do is get some space here on this user photo, and then I think we are good to go. So user photo, margin left, and let's say 1 rem. And actually we don't really need to format this user here, because we already did it up here with this selector, where we selected all of the elements at once. And the username also doesn't really need to be selected, because there's no style applying to it. Okay, let's actually set it back to 50% because that's a cleaner solution. And so with that, I think that is ready. Well, something here is not right. And yeah, of course it's not margin left, it's margin right. Okay, now this here looks like it has a lot more space here on this side than it has here. So it's not really symmetric. So let's change that one very quickly. So to 2 rem. And okay. So our hover here is also working. Let's compare it with this one here. And you see it actually is exactly the same. And so it's perfect. All right, so I hope that these first couple of lectures were really helpful for you to start grasping the concepts that are behind Flexbox. Different properties that we can use to align different elements in different situations, like the ones that I showed you up until this point. Now there's a lot more content to come and a lot more Flexbox to use, so stay tuned for these lectures that are to follow. See you next time.